The emergency lights pulsed red inside the collapsing corridor, casting the ship's final moments in slow, flickering agony. Each step Solon took echoed like a countdown. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Behind her was everything she had failed to save: the crew, the mission, the dream. In her arms, cradled like a fragile relic, was the unconscious alien captive. He wasn't supposed to matter, but the decision to free him hadn't felt like a decision at all. It was instinct, or defiance, or something quieter, a whisper in her chest, soft and certain, when everything else was fire and noise. The last escape pod sealed with a hiss. Solon dropped to her knees beside him and punched the launch command. The silence came fast. One moment, the warship Sparrow's wake was a screaming metal tomb. The next, only the hush of pressurized air and the faint hum of stabilizers. Solon curled her fingers round the emergency harness, breathing too fast. The pod rocked once, twice, then tore free from the explosion. The viewport filled with the violent blue-white glare of the ship's core going nova. She didn't cry. Not then, not when it still felt like maybe she'd wake up, like this was a drill gone wrong, like someone else had made all the mistakes. She only looked down at him. The alien's skin shimmered in the dim cabin light, silver blue, threaded with veins that pulsed like faint constellations. His face was almost human, save for the soft lattice of glowing lines under the skin and the gill-like slits that fluttered at his throat. She didn't know his name, his species, not even what side he'd been on. But when the Sparrow's wake had begun its death spiral, and her captain ordered all alien prisoners ejected to free up pod space, Solon had broken protocol. She'd carried him, slung him over her shoulder while the rest screamed into the dark. And now, there were only the two of them, drifting. A human who should have followed orders. An alien who might hate her when he woke up. A 3% chance of being found before the pod failed. She leaned back in the crash-cushioned seat. "Great job, cadet," she muttered to no one. He woke on the third day. The pod's internal systems were low on power. The heater had failed, leaving the small cabin cold enough to sting. Solon was curled near the emergency battery, wrapped in the thin silver of a shock blanket. She didn't hear him stir until his voice rasped out, "Are you the Gowler?" She turned sharply. His eyes were open, fogged but alert, pale like smoke, with pupils that shifted like lenses adjusting. His limbs were tangled in the net restraints. Solon lifted her hands slowly. "No, not anymore." He blinked, the motion fluid. "You should have let me die." "Yeah," she said softly. "I probably should have, for a long moment," he said. "Nothing. Then, why didn't you?" Solon looked at him fully, saw the way the lights of the pod reflected on his skin. "Because I made a promise." He tilted his head, the gesture precise. "To whom?" She hesitated. Then she looked down at her hands. "To myself." His name was Riv, or something close to it. The alien phonetics didn't quite translate, and his voice was soft, half whined, half thought. But Riv was what she called him. He didn't object. They kept two opposite corners of the pod at first, her on the pilot side, him near the storage rations. Silence filled the void between them. "You're afraid of me," he said once, not as a question. "No," she replied. Then added, "Just don't know you. You risked your life to save me." That's a strange place to draw a line. Solon stared at the failing nav systems. "It wasn't about you. Then who? Everyone I left behind." He didn't press. They passed 2 more days in near darkness. The power core dimmed each hour, and Solon began to map stars by memory through the viewport, trying to guess if their trajectory would take them anywhere with calm relays. Riv studied her in silence. He barely ate, barely moved, but he watched, and sometimes when the pod dipped slightly from a passing wave of dark matter wind, he would close his eyes and whisper in a language Solon didn't recognize, like he was listening to something far away, or someone. On the 7th day, the hull cracked. Just a hairline fracture, barely noticeable unless you ran your fingers along the wall. Solon found it while trying to adjust the stabilizer manually. She didn't tell him, not right away. He was curled in sleep again, breathing shallow. His skin had grown dimmer. The glow that once pulsed gently along his veins now flickered like dying fire. She sat across from him and whispered, "They said you were a spy." "I was." He opened his eyes. "You're not very good at hiding it," she murmured. "I didn't need to," he replied. "They already knew. That's why they took me." "Why would you spy on humans?" Riv looked past her, toward the cracked viewport. "I wanted to see if your people felt grief the way ours did. That's a strange thing to risk your life over." He smiled. It was a soft expression barely visible. "I lost someone. The grief never stopped. I thought maybe yours did. I thought maybe that was peace." Solon looked down. "It doesn't stop for us either." "Good," he whispered. "Then I wasn't alone." They started talking more after that. Small things. First, star maps, languages, the way their worlds smelled in spring. He asked if Earth was really as green as the vids. She said, "I've never been. I was born on a station above Europa. Closest I got to trees was a holo projection in a training dome." Riv pressed his palm to the viewport glass. "My home was green once, and gold. The sky had ribbons that shimmered like waves. What happened? We were told to choose sides, and we didn't." He didn't explain further. Solon didn't ask. Some things set too deep to pull up. On the 10th day, she kissed him, not out of passion, not even out of desire. It was smaller than that. Quieter. She had fallen asleep against the viewport. The cold had spread to her fingers, made her vision blur. She dreamed of smoke again, of voices on fire, and then she felt his hand over hers. When she opened her eyes, he was close, his face tilted to hers, his skin glowing faintly again, the way a candle might, defiant in the dark. His eyes searched hers, unsure. So she leaned forward, slow, and pressed her mouth to his. Soft, cold, electric. They stayed there a moment longer than a breath. Then she pulled back. He didn't speak, neither did she, but something between them changed. On the 12th day, the fracture grew. She woke to a shrill pressure alarm. The pod had rotated during drift, and the crack along the wall now pulsed with vacuum stress. Oxygen, 13 hours left. Solon checked the backup tank. It wouldn't be enough for two. She stared at it for a long time. Then she woke Riv. "We have to decide," she said, crouched beside him. "One of us has to go under cryo. The system only supports a single pod occupant in stasis. It's a failsafe." He stared at the console, silent. Solon swallowed. You're alien. You might have a better chance if you get picked up. Maybe someone recognizes your species. I'm just a cadet. No one's coming for me." He didn't move. She whispered, "Riv, take it." But he only looked at her, calm and steady. "No," he said. "You can't." "No," he repeated, voice firmer. "You made a promise, remember, to yourself. You keep it." Her throat closed. "Please," she said. "I don't want you to." "I know." He touched her face, soft. "But you saved me. Now I return it." She screamed when he sealed the cryo unit from outside, pounded on the glass, slammed her fists until her knuckles split. He stood just beyond the seal, calm. "Don't you dare. You need to live," he said quietly. "You feel grief the way I do. That means your people still have something worth saving." Her voice broke. "I just wanted." "I know," he said, and this time, he pressed his forehead to the glass. The ship shuddered again. Another warning klaxon. "Don't go," she whispered. "I'll be with you," he said. "Even if you forget me, even if no one believes you, somewhere in the starlight you'll find me again." He stepped back. And then he opened the outer airlock. She screamed as the vacuum pulled him into the void. He didn't struggle. He just vanished into the dark. For months later, a search drone found her pod. The cryo chamber was still intact. Oxygen, 1%. Solon woke in a med bay with a tube in her throat and the taste of salt and frost on her tongue. The officers called her a hero, called her lucky. She said nothing, not until she was alone. Then she whispered his name, and the stars, quiet and listening, did not forget. The first time she stood in front of the Relaxian tactical simulation wall, Amari saw her reflection in the metal frame and thought she looked more ghost than cadet. Her survival odds were down to 1% now, apparently losing to teammates. In the Fyra drift trial dropped the betting pool even lower. She didn't care. "I'll go alone," she had said, jaw clenched like a steel vise. When the instructors questioned her insistence on re-entering the test route without backup. Relaxian protocol forbade it. But humans weren't from relax. They came from fire and oceans, from collapsing economies and screaming newborns in blackout cities. She was born under a leaking ceiling, not a starlight dome. This was just one more storm. The sim wall shimmered, and the fire adrift reassembled. Metal ruins of long-dead freighters, twisted asteroid trails, magnetic haze. The place that killed Eero and Varnan. Amari whispered their names under her breath before stepping through the portal. What awaited her wasn't just memory or wreckage, it was something new. The drift had changed. A Relaxian AI was observing, adjusting. It wanted to break her rhythm, to test whether she'd learned or merely repeated. Amari didn't need rhythm. She needed instinct. She locked eyes with the floating minefield ahead. Not real, but real enough for the sim to collapse her bones if she faltered. She boosted low and hard under the first cluster, tilting left, baiting the AI's sensor prediction algorithms. Then she dropped a flare drone, one of the modifications. She'd spent 3 straight nights coding. The mines went for it like hungry teeth. Her breath didn't steady. She didn't relax. She didn't believe in luck, only preparation. When she hit the next corridor of twisted metal, something shot at her. Not part of the original test. Something foreign pirate code. Rogue data. No. Worse, live fire. The sim wasn't a sim anymore. Her HUD blinked red. A kill switch was tripped somewhere back in the real world. They were watching her. This isn't part of the parameters, she muttered, ducking under another beam. Her mind raced. Was this punishment? A test within a test. Cadet Amari, abort. The voice came through the calms like ice. One of the Relaxian instructors. No, she answered. The silence after that stretched, until finally, do you understand what's at stake? I understand better than you, she said. You think 2% means I should give up. I think it means I still have 98 ways to make you regret underestimating me. She disabled her calm. Minutes passed like years. Every move in the drift was a recalculation, a reshaping of data and danger. Amari's suit was scorched. Her drones were gone. But her eyes gleamed with the stubborn heat that marked humans in Relaxian archives, tenacity mistaken for madness. She reached the control beacon buried deep in the field. The objective, the place Eero had died trying to reach. It pulsed like a heart. She reached out, palm trembling, and connected her neural core. A surge, her vision flooded with fire adrift code. But it wasn't just a simulation anymore. Someone or something was manipulating it. Live. Remote overrides, corrupted archives. She wasn't being tested. She was being hunted. Back at the observation room, instructors stared in silence. Data streams rolled in. Amari's neural feedback, the unauthorized code shifts, the collapsed probability curves. She's adapting. One of them whispered, she shouldn't be able to. Then perhaps our assumptions were wrong. Amari limped through the last gate of the drift sim. Her suit hissed and fell open. She collapsed onto the training floor, eyes wide, breath ragged. A Relaxian aide ran toward her. Others followed. No one spoke. She looked up, smirked through a bloody lip, and whispered, 1% now, huh? No, said a voice she didn't recognize. 2.1. She blinked, then laughed. In the dark corners of the training stations, cadets whispered her name. The human, the ghost. The girl with the odds stacked against her who kept stacking them higher. She had survived. Now she wanted more. She wanted to win. The sky over Deltaive cracked with light, not from sun or weapon but something stranger, celestial. The dust-stormed valley they called the Crucible shimmered as if layered over with ghosts of other worlds. Cadet Solon adjusted her heat filtration mask, but her thoughts were far away. They always were now. Ever since her improbable survival in the sinkhole assault and the orbital collapse of Station Juno, her 3% was a whisper that had become thunder across the academy. A cadet who should have died twice and now walked with the badge of a veteran. Today was different. The Crucible wasn't a training simulation or war zone. It was a test site left behind by an extinct species and artifact world. And they had sent her, the alien guide. A fractaline being of translucent limbs and memory crystals embedded along its skin, hovered just ahead of her, It pulsed softly with a red-violet glow. "Your kind is reactive," it said without turning. "Why do you follow instructions without knowing what lies ahead?" "Because if I waited to understand everything, I'd never get anything done," Solon replied, voice crisp through the modulator. "Besides, if this kills me, that means the universe is back to making sense." The guide tilted slightly in a motion she had learned to recognize as amusement. The entry portal was a sphere of oily glass set into the valley floor. One step forward. As she was swallowed by silence, she landed not in darkness, but in fractal brilliance, a hallway that repeated itself endlessly in mirrored arches, glowing with soft geometries that shifted colors based on how she moved. The guide did not follow. This test was for her and her alone. As she stepped forward, the floor lit beneath her boots. Voices tickled her ears, not sounds, not even thoughts, but impressions, regret, hope, desire for transformation. Solon gritted her teeth. This wasn't tech, this was something psychic, and it was speaking to her in a language older than speech. "I don't need a redemption arc," she muttered. "I just need a way out." But the corridor changed anyway. A wall pulled back to reveal a desert, cracked and gray, stretching under to moons. At the center, a figure kneeled over something buried. It was her, or something that looked like her. The double didn't react as she approached. It continued to dig in the sand, fingers bleeding from the effort. "Who are you burying?" Solon asked. The figure looked up, and the pain in its eyes wasn't hers but her mother's. "You," the double said, "or the version that quit." She stumbled back. The moons disappeared. The scene folded like paper and reassembled. Now she was in a storm. Rain hammered like fists. Shapes moved in the mist. Her classmates, calling her name, shouting warnings, accusing her. "Why you? Why not them? What made you special?" Solon ran. She didn't want to answer, didn't want to admit she didn't know. The next chamber wasn't a vision. It was real. A platform floated above a sea of raw energy, crackling with violet arcs. At the center was a device, a console, glowing with glyphs. A voice came, not her own, not human. "If you understand this, you are the bridge. The 2% proves more than survival. It proves translation. Between what was and what can be." Solon blinked. At the console, translation. "This isn't just a test. You were looking for someone who could think both ways, alien and human." The console pulsed. A map appeared, not of one world, but dozens. Empty, ruined, with one common element, a signal echoing from each, repeating every 2.6 seconds. Heartbeat intervals. They were trying to save someone, she murmured, or leave a trail. Her hand hovered over the activation rune. Once she touched it, nothing would be the same. She could feel it. These ruins were a network. She could wake them. But waking meant more than knowledge. It meant war, diplomacy, danger, and legacy. She closed her eyes, thought of her mother's hands at the farewell ceremony, thought of every friend who hadn't made it, thought of the smile she forced when the medics told her she had lived while others hadn't, and she touched the rune. The Crucible Valley shook. Light lanced into the sky, far above, in orbital command. Signals flooded the scanners. Dozens of dead planets blinked with life. And in the center, Cadet Solon stood alone, face lit by a console made by minds long extinct yet somehow, waiting only for her. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just whispered, "Let's see what we can do with the other 97%. The plasma storm cracked across the horizon like the sky itself had been torn open. Dust hissed against the outer hull of the transport skimmer. As it careened just above the canyon floor, the pilot, a stitched-up ex-Marsburn named Rello, cursed in 5 languages while trying to keep the craft from nose-diving into a crag. "You said this route was clear," Kaz shouted from the co-pilot seat, clutching the armrest like it owed her money. "Was clear until the atmosphere shifted like a drunk flipping a table." Rello growled, behind them. Laria held on with one hand and clutched the side compartment with the other, wedging herself into the narrow frame of the skimmer. Her cadet badge had long since been scorched off. Her eyes glowed with focus, not fear. "Do we have comms yet?" she asked. "Static. Interference is frying everything past the relay." Kaz checked the console again. "We're flying blind." The skimmer dipped. Kaz cursed. Rello laughed. Hold tight, then the alarm screamed. Proximity. Alert. Out of the haze. A jagged swarm of interceptor drones sliced through the storm front like angry hornets. Their cores pulsed blue, weapon mounts already heating. They followed us, Kez said. No. They were waiting, Laria muttered. This was the plan. You planned to get us shot? Rello barked. No. I planned to make them overplay their hand. Laria unclipped the latch on the cargo panel and kicked it open. A coiled, gleaming barrel of non-standard ordnance slid out. Kez stared. You stole that from the base armory. Stole is a strong word, Laria said. I redirected it. Temporarily. The cannon was older tech pre-Earthfall, illegal on most Federation worlds. But it worked, and it hummed now with Laria's calm hands feeding it charged cells. The drones opened fire. The skimmer spun. Laria braced her legs, anchored the mount to the rear post, and squeezed the trigger. The old cannon screamed like a banshee let loose. From a time-vo, a wall of fire and kinetic pulses slammed into the interceptors, turning the first wave into glowing metal snow. Kaz stared at the aftermath. You're insane. Better than dead, Laria said. Rello whooped. Cadet, remind me to never bet against you. The skimmer rocketed through the disrupted storm, weaving between columns of stone and debris. The second wave of drones followed, smarter, faster. Kaz muttered. They're adjusting. Won't work twice. It doesn't have to, Laria said. She reloaded, fired, blew apart the cliff wall beside them. The collapse wasn't aimed at the drones, it was aimed at the skimmer's own path. What the hell? Rello screamed. The rockslide buried the skimmer. Darkness fell. Then light broke just as they burst from a hidden tunnel exit on the other side of the ridge. Laria's detour had been deliberate. Kez blinked at her. That wasn't survival. That was prediction. Laria nodded. And desperation. The drones, thinking them dead, had pulled back. The storm chased them no more. They limped toward outpost Saren, hull cracked, barely flying. But they made it. And in the dust of the landing, with crews rushing to assess and triage, Laria stepped down. Not a hero, not yet, but alive and still at 97%. The capital ring burned in streaks of fire and stardust high above the orbiting cadet fleet, while thousands of evacuation pods bloomed like desperate flowers from its ruptured hulls. Amid the chaos, beneath the last shield dome of the flagship, Yulin's Mercy, Sora gritted her teeth as the hull beneath her feet vibrated with each passing salvo. 2 minutes until total breach, came the voice of Talim, her half-synthetic co-pilot and moral counterweight. We should evacuate. Sora wiped the back of her hand across her forehead, smearing grease with blood, and leave the evac route jammed. With civilian traffic, we do that, they die first. The cadet had no rank, no medals, just a control stick wired directly into her neural spine, and the authority she'd stolen by surviving everything the galaxy had thrown at her. When the brass stopped answering hails, Sora commandeered the bridge. And now, at the very edge of the end, she was about to fly straight through the teeth of the enemy blockade. Talim's mechanical eye blinked twice. You're making irrational calculations. No, she replied softly. I just have more to fight for than survival. The blockade stretched like a noose. 27 vessels from the unified core, each one twice the firepower of the Mercy. But Sora didn't need to win. She just needed to punch a hole. Talim rerouted all remaining shields to the prow. They stood alone on the bridge, a skeleton crew of 1 human cadet and 1 broken protocol droid facing what should have been the end. On my mark, Sora whispered. The countdown hit 10 seconds. 9, 8, you're stalling, Talim said. Sora didn't answer. She was waiting, because she'd sent a single-coded transmission through the old cadet network. Not a call for help, a promise. I'm not asking anyone to die. I'm just not letting this war decide who we get to be. 7, 6. Then the scanner lit up. Not with enemies. With returning ghosts. Every cadet that survived the impossible simulations. Every dropout who refused to watch the galaxy eat itself. Fighters with no ships. Ships with no fuel. Refits and rusted hulls. But they answered. Because she did. 5, 4. Are those? Talim asked, blinking again. Yes, Sora said. They Heard me. Double quotes. Three. Ships without flags surged forward, slamming into the blockade's rear formation with reckless speed. Cadets who had once buried themselves in the outer moons ignited their last reserves too. The blockade faltered. 1. SORA pushed the throttle. The Mercy roared like it remembered what hope felt like. Inside the wreckage of the core fleet, they found the chamber, not a weapon, a signal gate, what the enemy had always sought to protect. It wasn't meant for conquest, it was a record, a library of futures lost and found, stored in starlight, mapped onto the DNA of cadets who'd survived long enough to remember the ones who didn't. It would take years to decode, generations maybe, but it was theirs now, and no longer protected by fear. SORA stood at the viewport days later, watching the refugee fleet orbit around the ruins of the Capitol Ring. Talon was beside her, patching data from old cores into new archives. "You never told me what the other 97% was for," he said quietly. She turned to him, eyes clear, scars glowing faintly in the dim light. "It's for the days after, for everything. We build once we stop surviving and start living." Then she smiled. "And maybe one day, for telling the next cadet why we fought in the first place."